The worst day of my life started with a meeting invite that had no subject line. I noticed that detail before I noticed anything else, sitting at my desk at 8:50 in the morning with a cold cup of tea beside my keyboard. I walked into the glass conference room at 9 sharp, coffee still untouched in my hand, my badge clipped neatly to my blazer the same way it had been every day for 6 years. Grant Holloway was already sitting there. Naomi Pierce sat beside him with a folder closed flat in front of her, both hands resting on top of it, like she did not want to be the one to open it first. Grant did not look up right away. He was, in his own strange way, a careful man, the kind who remembered every client's name and their children's ages without ever checking a note, who leadership adored for exactly that reason. He turned his silver signet ring once on his finger, slow, the way he always did before he said something cruel. Then he told me the company was ending our working relationship due to low performance. I almost laughed out loud. I had closed 3 of the department's biggest accounts that quarter, alone, under my own name on every quarterly report filed with leadership, numbers that had earned the whole team a bonus pool in April. I said nothing about that. I already knew the numbers would not matter in this particular room. Grant turned the ring again, slower this time, and said a person needed to learn to judge their own level honestly before blaming everyone around them. Naomi adjusted her glasses with 2 fingers before she spoke, careful, like she was choosing each word off a narrow shelf. She said the transition would be handled with dignity and respect for my contributions to the team over the years. As she said it, she slid the closed folder half an inch toward herself, away from Grant's reach, a small motion I did not understand the meaning of until much later. I asked if I could see the performance documentation that led to this decision. Grant said the paperwork would follow through proper channels in due time. I asked which specific project had triggered the low performance rating, since every project that quarter had closed successfully under my name. Grant said the rating reflected a broader pattern rather than any single project, an answer vague enough to mean whatever he needed it to mean in that moment. Naomi did not add anything to that, which told me more than either of them realized. Outside the glass wall, 3 analysts pretended to work while watching the whole scene unfold over their monitors. Nobody looked away fast enough when I glanced up at them. This was not the first time I had watched this exact kind of meeting happen to someone else in that same room. 6 months earlier, a junior analyst named Owen had been called in for a nearly identical conversation. No warning, no documentation, just a closed door and a folder nobody ever let him actually read. He had come out of that room pale and silent, clearing his desk within the hour while the rest of us pretended not to notice, whispering afterward that surely there had been some mistake somewhere. At the time I had told myself it was different for me, that my own work spoke clearly enough to protect me from whatever had happened to him. Sitting across from Grant now, folder closed, decision already made, I understood exactly how naive that belief had always been. Naomi had been in the room the day Owen was let go too, I remembered now, standing in nearly the same spot with the same closed folder in front of her. She had adjusted her glasses then exactly the way she just had with me, and I wondered, walking out of the glass room, whether she had noticed the pattern herself yet or whether it would take her longer than it had taken me. A security guard walked me to the lobby afterward, my laptop already boxed under his arm like evidence being carried out of a courtroom after a verdict. He asked for my badge without quite looking at my face, the way people avoid eye contact during small unpleasant tasks. I unclipped it from my blazer and set it into his open palm. He dropped it into a clear plastic tray built for exactly this purpose, a tray meant for people like me, worn shiny at the edges from years of use by people who had come before me. My hand was still open when the air in front of my eyes changed. Not a phone screen. Not a hallucination. A pale gold outline hung directly in my vision, steady, close enough that I could have reached out and touched it if I tried. It read System Initialized. Objective Available. Below it, a second line formed slowly, letter by letter. Current status, everything lost. I blinked hard, twice, and the text stayed exactly where it was, patient, entirely unbothered by my disbelief. A third line appeared beneath the first 2, plain and almost bored in tone. Survive the next 30 days. Not revenge. Not my job back. Just that, worded like a system that had watched this exact kind of morning play out 1,000 times before and felt nothing about it either way. I walked out through the revolving doors holding an empty cardboard box and a badge that no longer opened anything, not even the bathroom door on my old floor. Before the elevator doors even finished closing behind me, a soft chime sounded somewhere just behind my ear. Reward unlocked, it said. Pattern recognition level 1. I did not understand what any of that meant, and some small stubborn part of me refused to feel curious about it right then. I told myself it was shock, some strange trick my mind was playing to soften an unbearable morning I had not seen coming. On the walk to the train, pieces of the last 2 years came back to me in flashes I had never let myself examine directly before that day. Grant taking my slide deck into an executive meeting and presenting it as his own initiative, standing at the front of the room while I sat quietly near the back taking notes on my own idea. Grant cutting me off in front of clients with the same tired line, "Let the adults finish talking," delivered with a small smile that made it sound almost like an inside joke rather than an insult. None of it had felt like a pattern while it was actually happening to me, one meeting at a time, spread out over months. Standing on the train platform with a box in my arms and a badge gone from my pocket, I finally understood the firing wasn't a single decision made that morning at all. It was the last page of a story that had been written a long time before anyone ever called me into that room to hear it read aloud. I thought about Owen again on that platform, about the way he had packed his desk into a single bag without asking anyone for help that day. None of us had helped him carry it to the elevator either, too afraid that standing near him might make us look guilty of something we hadn't done ourselves. I promised myself, standing there with my own empty box, that I would not disappear the same quiet way he had disappeared from that floor. That evening I sat at my kitchen table and opened my personal laptop to look for the severance letter HR had promised to send within the week. My inbox loaded slowly, the way it always did on my building's old shared Wi-Fi that never quite worked the way the landlord promised it would. One message near the top glowed faintly at the edges, a thin gold outline around the subject line that no email client I had ever used could produce on its own, not even the expensive one my old company had licensed for the whole floor. I clicked it without letting myself think twice about where it had actually come from. It was an internal distribution message, the kind meant only for department leads, sent to an old group list I had been quietly dropped from just after my termination went through that same afternoon. Attached was a PDF, an internal reduction list with names, dates, and short planning notes typed beside each one in a small gray font. My name sat halfway down the second page, between two people I barely knew from another floor entirely. Beside it, a note read, "Termination prepared 6 weeks earlier." Below that, in smaller text, someone had typed a private comment clearly meant for internal eyes only, never intended for the person it described. Remove before audit. Transfer accounts afterward. The initials beside the comment were Grant's, small and familiar, the same initials he signed on every memo he ever sent me over the years. I sat very still for a long moment, the cursor blinking inside an unopened reply box I had no intention of ever using. The decision had been made weeks earlier. Grant had looked me in the eyes and pretended it was about my performance. Right then, the gold outline returned in front of my eyes, calmer this time, almost patient with how slowly I was catching up. Objective updated. Prove intent, it read, and then it faded quietly out of view without any further explanation attached. I checked the file's properties out of old professional habit, the same way I checked every document before I ever sent it anywhere important for work. A server timestamp sat quietly in the metadata, 6 weeks earlier than my actual termination date, printed in plain black text nobody had bothered to hide or scrub before forwarding it along. I understood, reading it twice over, exactly why the message had reached me at all that evening. It had gone out to an old departmental list that still technically included my personal email address, a list I had only been formally removed from after my termination was finalized that same afternoon by someone in a hurry. Whoever built that automated list had simply forgotten to update it in time before the message went out to everyone still on it. I did not cry over any of it sitting there at my table. I read the reduction list a second time, slower, looking for any other name I might recognize from the analytics floor. Owen's name appeared 3 lines above mine, dated the same week, with a note that simply said, "Handled quietly." I understood then that whatever had happened to me had already happened to him first, on a smaller scale, without anyone bothering to write down the reason at all. I saved the file in 3 separate places, 2 drives and 1 printed copy, before I finally allowed myself to close the laptop for the night and go to bed. For the first few days after that, I stopped fighting with my own feelings and simply did what the system asked, one small task at a time, nothing more than that. Each objective it gave me was modest and specific, nothing dramatic, nothing that would have looked like revenge to anyone watching from outside my apartment window. It flagged a job posting on a career site I would have scrolled straight past without a second look on any normal day, a senior analytics role at a mid-sized firm I had never once considered applying to before. It highlighted, the next morning, an old professional connection I had not spoken to in over a year, someone whose name I would not have thought to search on my own. It highlighted a single clause buried in an old employment contract I had signed years earlier and never bothered to read closely since. It suggested, once, quietly, which personal files were worth saving copies of before my company access got fully revoked at midnight. None of it felt like magic while it was actually happening to me in real time. It felt like someone quietly walking through a familiar house and switching on lights I had never noticed were off in the first place. The system never gave me the answers. It only showed me what I had been too afraid to see on my own. Through an old contact from a former industry conference, I arranged coffee with Elias Mercer near his office downtown, a small place with mismatched chairs and good afternoon light by the window. He set his cup down with the handle turned exactly outward, the base landing precisely on the edge of the coaster, and he left it sitting there untouched for most of our conversation. He had left our old company 2 years earlier for a competitor down the street, a move that had scandalized the office for exactly 1 week before everyone moved on. He admitted, halfway through his coffee, that Grant had taken credit for one of his ideas too, years before it ever happened to me, and that he had left partly because he never found the nerve to say so out loud at the time. He listened to my situation without interrupting me even once, occasionally nodding at the parts that clearly did not surprise him at all. His new company, he said, had been quietly looking for someone at my level for months already, ever since a director on his team had left for maternity leave and never come back. Within 2 weeks, I had a first interview, then a second one with a director I had once pitched against at an industry event years earlier, then finally an offer with a salary well above anything I had ever made before in my career. The gold outline flickered once during that second interview, a single line reading objective updated, secure leverage, gone before I had finished shaking the director's hand. I did not mention severance or the reduction list to anyone at Elias's company during the process, choosing instead to let my work speak the way it always should have been allowed to at my old job. Grant knew none of this yet, and I intended to keep it that way for as long as I reasonably could manage. In parallel, Priya Bennett, an employment lawyer Elias introduced me to over a short phone call one evening, went through my old documents line by line at her kitchen table one Saturday while I sat across from her drinking too much coffee. She tapped the cap of her pen twice against her legal pad whenever she found something worth flagging, a quiet little rhythm that clearly meant trouble for whoever had written the paragraph in front of her. She found several clear violations of labor law buried inside the reduction paperwork, timing issues mostly, undocumented performance claims dated after the fact, a missing formal warning that should have existed somewhere and simply did not. She said quietly that this kind of paper trail rarely survived contact with an actual audit, and she was right more than she knew at the time. She mentioned once, almost in passing, that she had taken this kind of case for years because her own mother had been let go the same quiet way decades earlier with no folder anyone ever let her read either. She flagged a second inconsistency the following week, a performance review dated 1 month before my termination that praised my work in specific detail, signed by a manager who no longer worked at the company and could not have written anything more recent. She asked me, tapping her pen once against the page, whether anyone else on the reduction list might have similar documents worth requesting. I thought immediately of Owen, though I had no way to reach him anymore since he had left the industry entirely after that spring. I opened a new bank account that same week, entirely separate from anything tied to my old employer, since none of my personal finances had run through their systems anyway once my termination officially took effect. I moved into a smaller apartment closer to my new office 2 weeks later, an easy thing to keep quiet since nobody from my old floor knew my new address or had any real reason to go looking for it. Small precautions, none of them dramatic, each one closing a door that Grant did not know had ever been opened to him in the first place. Elias's company planned to announce my hire publicly only after my probation period ended in 90 days, which meant the whole contract stayed private for now, tucked away from anyone who might mention it casually to Grant over drinks. Meanwhile, Grant started to notice small things that clearly unsettled him, even from a distance he could not quite explain to himself. I did not call him. I did not ask for a written reference letter. I did not argue publicly or post anything online about what had happened to me that morning. Then, through a mutual contact from another department, he learned I had filed no formal complaint at all, no lawyer's letter, no angry email to leadership, and that particular silence seemed to worry him far more than any lawsuit ever could have managed to. The same contact mentioned, almost as an aside, that Grant had started checking his phone during meetings where my name came up, and had asked someone in HR twice within a month whether anyone had heard from me. Some mornings the gold outline returned with nothing but a single number floating quietly in the corner of my vision while I made coffee. Progress. 41%, it read once, with no explanation attached to it at all beyond the number itself. Weeks passed in a rhythm I had never allowed myself before, one where mornings belonged entirely to me instead of to someone else's calendar. I spent them reading through old client files I still legally owned copies of, cross-referencing dates against the numbers Priya kept finding, building a picture that grew clearer the longer I sat with it. Elias met me for coffee a second time near the end of my probation research, setting his cup down again with the handle turned outward, the same careful placement as before, as though the gesture steadied something in him the way straightening paper steadied something in me. He asked how the transition was going, and I told him honestly that it felt less like starting over and more like finally being allowed to finish something I had already built years earlier under someone else's name. He said his company had noticed the same quiet competence in my first month that had made them chase me in the first place, and that probation would likely end early given how the work was going. I told him I appreciated hearing it, though some old habit still made me brace for a correction that never came. The gold outline appeared once more that week, a short line reading objective updated, let them wonder, fading before I could ask it anything back. A few days before the audit was even scheduled, it appeared once more, sharper than usual. Hidden variable detected, Naomi Pierce, it read, and nothing else. I did not understand it right away, and I nearly dismissed it as another vague nudge. Only later, once the folder had already changed hands, did I understand it had been trying to tell me she might not stay silent forever. Naomi, meanwhile, began quietly requesting copies of old performance reviews from HR archives, ostensibly for a routine records cleanup nobody had actually asked for. I understood only later that she had already made a personal copy of the reduction list the day I was let go, sliding it into her own desk drawer instead of returning it with the rest of Grant's paperwork, unsure herself why she had bothered. Word of her requests reached me secondhand through a former coworker who still checked in occasionally, careful never to say too much over text. I did not reach out to Naomi directly, unsure yet whether her doubt was real or simply procedural caution. The day I signed my new contract at a small law office downtown, Priya sitting beside me reading each clause aloud before I initialed it, I noticed my own hands squaring the edges of the pages into a neat, even stack before I finally picked up the pen. The exact same small habit I had always fallen into before every decision that ever mattered to me in my life. The external audit landed on the company calendar 3 months later, a routine annual review that Grant's department had passed without incident every single year before this particular one. Marjorie Sloan, the company's finance director, sat near the head of the table checking figures on a small pocket calculator even for simple sums she clearly could have worked out in her head without any real trouble at all. Naomi attended too, along with two outside auditors and a handful of senior leadership pulled in specifically for the closing session that afternoon. Priya had already passed the auditors a folder days earlier, containing the internal reduction list, a set of internal memos, server access logs, and metadata confirming exactly when each document had actually been created and edited over time. The room used a shared screen connected to the lead auditor's laptop, so every file appeared for the whole table to see at once, nothing hidden, nothing private about any of it anymore for anyone present. The lead auditor opened the folder on the shared screen without any preamble, letting the room read the first page in silence before asking a single question. Grant tried to explain the reduction list as a routine planning draft, nothing unusual about early internal thinking on staffing decisions. But the timestamps on screen contradicted him at every single turn, one after another, plain black numbers that did not care how confident his voice sounded in the room. One of the auditors asked directly why a termination note existed 6 weeks before any documented performance conversation had ever taken place with the employee in question. Grant said the note must have been an early draft, nothing more, a placeholder someone had written and forgotten to delete afterward. Marjorie looked up from her calculator at that exact moment and asked, quietly, why a placeholder would include specific instructions about transferring client accounts before an audit. Grant had no clean answer ready for her. Naomi adjusted her glasses again, slower this time, and said absolutely nothing to support his version of events when one of the auditors looked her way for confirmation. A few executives leaned forward and asked direct follow-up questions he clearly had not prepared for at all that morning. One of the executives asked whether other employees had been affected by similar irregularities on the same list, and Priya's folder already had an answer prepared for exactly that question. 2 more names surfaced on screen alongside mine, each with a note in the same small gray font, each dated weeks before any documented conversation had taken place with the employee. One of the auditors said quietly that the findings would be forwarded to the board within the week for further review, and that the company's outside counsel would likely want statements from everyone named on the list. Grant's hand drifted to his ring and began turning it faster than before, an old habit suddenly stripped of its usual weight and meaning in front of everyone watching. For the first time since I had known him, the gesture looked less like control and more like something close to fear settling slowly into his face. Someone on the leadership side asked, almost gently, whether he wanted to add anything else before the session closed for the day. Grant said only that he had always acted in the company's best interest, a sentence that landed flat against a room full of people who had just watched 3 separate timestamps prove otherwise. The only sound in the room for a long stretch afterward was the soft click of the auditor's keyboard, opening the next file each time Grant's answer failed to hold up under a simple date printed in black and white. He found me outside my new office building a week after the audit closed, standing near the entrance like he had been waiting there for a while already in the afternoon heat. He said I knew how these companies actually worked, that this could still disappear quietly if we both handled it the right way. I said nothing to that, and his tone shifted a moment later. He said everything could still be worked out between us, mentioned a written reference letter, a settlement figure, even a different role somewhere else inside the company if I wanted it. I told him I had already accepted a position elsewhere months earlier, a fact he clearly had not known until that exact moment. He asked, quietly, why I never called him once during any of it. I said there was nothing left between us worth a phone call. He said he had underestimated me, that he had assumed I would fight loudly or not at all. I told him he had never actually needed to underestimate me, only to notice me correctly in the first place. He said my name then, Ivy, quietly, not employee, not resource, the way he had never once said it in 6 years of working together. I reached into my bag and took out the old metal badge, the same one I had carried out of that building in a plastic tray months earlier that morning. I looked at it quietly for a few seconds before I set it into his open hand without any ceremony at all attached to the gesture. I do not need this back anymore, I said. It's just a piece of metal now, I added, and I turned and walked toward the entrance of my new building without waiting for any reply from him at all. Behind me, the old gesture returned for a moment, but this time it carried no power. The gold outline returned one final time in front of my eyes, brief and quiet, almost gentle about it. Main objective completed, it read, and then it disappeared for good, like it had never once been there at all in my life. Walking through the lobby doors of a job that actually respected my work, I understood something simple that had taken me years to learn properly for myself. The real reward was never the system itself. It was the exact moment I stopped measuring my own worth by someone else's verdict on it. So tell me honestly, was that ending fair enough, or should Ivy have gone further before walking away from him for good? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if this story kept you hooked until the very end, hit like and subscribe for more stories just like it.